All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 2 of Excel, or it might be your personal week 1 if you weren't here last week. But all good either way. If you have some kind of basic experience with formulas, even if you weren't here last week, you should be able to follow along just fine. All right, so what we're going to do today is build on a lot of what we talked about last week. So last week we covered a lot of basic formulas in Excel, formulas for manipulating text, numbers, dates, all that good stuff, combining and nesting formulas. What we're going to do today is do kind of a little refresher on that to keep you nice and up to date on that stuff. And then we're going to dig into one of the most commonly used slightly more complex formulas in Excel, which is called XLOOKUP. So that's going to be kind of the focus of our session today. We're also going to talk about how to use formulas to create cumulative functions. I'll get into that towards the second part of our session today. So basically getting deeper into some of our formulas, doing kind of a refresh on the formulas that we talked about last week. I'm also going to talk a little bit about using AI tools as it relates to Excel, how to think about them, some tips that I have related to that. Make sure you go to this site. I also have it on the whiteboard, and it's in kind of tiny text at the bottom of all the slides. You'll see a link on there for our week 2 data set. So when you pop open that link, it should bring you to our week 2 page. You should look for data for week 2. Once you click on data for week 2, you'll see a sheet that looks like this. I think you all will have like view only to this sheet. So you'll want to make a copy either in Excel online or download a copy that you can use, because we'll be writing formulas using this sheet during this session. So if you, that's from last week. So if you have any issues with the link or any questions, issues getting it downloaded, just let me know. All right. Cool. And I'm going to talk for a couple minutes before you have to get into the sheet. So you take a couple minutes and get that all set up. Okay, so just reviewing some of the basics of formulas as we talked about in our intro. So depending on the version of Excel that you're using, or if you're using Google Sheets or numbers or anything else, that's totally fine. Some of the menu names might be slightly different. If you can't find something, just give me a wave. But I think for Mac and online, they should mostly be accurate. So when you open up your formula builder, which should be insert function if you're on desktop, or I think it's under formulas if you're on the web version. This will give you kind of your library of available formulas that you can use in Excel. This is super helpful because I don't think it's a great use of time to try to memorize all the formulas that you might ever need in Excel. Instead, you should have some idea of the types of things you can accomplish via formulas and know where to go search for them. So you could come search here for what you're looking for. Obviously, you can also Google or use ChatGPT to kind of try to find the formula that you're looking for. But if you're just already in Excel, this is right here. Good for a quick search. All right. So just a quick reminder of how formulas work. Each formula is going to have its own number of arguments. So that's when we talk about the syntax of a formula, that's what we're talking about. So the most simple formulas will have 0 or 1 arguments. So this is a function we talked about in the last session, len, which gives you the length of a piece of text. That formula only has 1 argument, which is the piece of text that you want the length of. There's not really anything else you could give it. And if you don't give it that, it can't do anything. So it'll have, this is our argument. Anytime we're typing in our formula, we're always typing an equal sign first. That's how Excel recognizes that you're typing in a formula. If you try to type in some text that you just want to start with an equal sign, it will try to read it as some of our formulas, including some of the ones we'll talk about today, will also have some optional arguments. So a function might just need 1 to be able to run, but there might be some additional options that you can apply. Those will usually be in brackets in your formula builder or in any like online documentation that you're looking at. So if you see an argument that's sort of in brackets in a formula, that means it's going to be an optional one. All right. So let's just do a quick review of one of the exercises we worked on in our last session, which was we were working with Netflix movie and show data. And so we had a formula to create a URL for each show, custom URL. This is not how the Netflix website works, but for the purposes of an exercise, you could imagine that a Netflix show would have a site like netflix.com/Love is Blind or /The Crown or whatever you're watching. All right. So the exercise that we worked through was to get to that from our list of show titles. Okay, so we have a data set of show titles and we want to generate a URL like this for each of those. So I'm going to do a quick kind of review of what we did in the last session. To create this result, we nested together 3 different formulas. Okay, we used the substitute formula, the lower formula, and the concatenate formula. Okay, so what we did is we used our substitute formula to take out any spaces in our show titles because we didn't want our URL to end up with any spaces. So we used the substitute formula to look for any spaces and replace them with just nothing. It's called an empty string. We then used our lower formula, which is takes any text and puts it into lowercase, right? Because we don't necessarily want the capital letters in our show titles. A lot of URLs are not necessarily case sensitive, so that might work. But we want to put them all in lowercase for the purposes of this. And we also want to attach this www.netflix.com piece to the beginning. And attaching pieces of text together is when we use our concatenate formula. All right, so I'm going to do each of those separately and then remind you sort of how they nest together. So first thing we're going to do is do our substitute formula. So we're going to type in our equal sign. We're going to do substitute. You'll usually get a little sort of suggestion once you start typing a formula, which saves you a little time. And then you'll get this great little helper box that either pops up here or on the right-hand side, depending on which version of Excel you have, that'll remind you what your arguments need to be. In this case, our substitute formula takes our text, so the thing that we want to substitute characters in, the piece of text that we want to replace in that text, and the new thing we want to replace them with. All right, so I'm going to take my chunk of text, in this case is my show title. So I'm going to click on this cell, or I could type in K4 if I wanted to. I'm going to do a comma between my arguments. All right. My second argument is that old text. So what's the text I want to get rid of? In this case, that is the space itself. So I'm going to do quotes to indicate that I'm talking about text. I'm going to do a space and then a second quote. See my formula lined up here. They're separated by a space. That's my second argument. And then my last argument is, all right, go look in K4, find the text that's in there. If there's any spaces in there, replace it with this other thing I'm about to type in. In this case, I want to replace it with nothing. I, in fact, want it to sort of evaporate. So I'm going to give it an empty string, or just 2 quotes right next to each other, 2 double quotes right next to each other, no spaces or any text between. It's my empty string. And then I'm going to close my parentheses and hit enter. And so you'll see I've just removed my space. Otherwise, my show title is the same. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is use my lower formula. So I'm going to take this thing that we just created with our substitute and put it into lowercase. So same deal. I'm going to start with an equal sign. I'm going to type in this formula lower, open parentheses, and see what my arguments are. In this case, another simple formula. My whole argument is there's just one argument in the syntax for this function, which is the piece of text that I want to go in lowercase. All right, so I can go over my arrow keys. I can click it with my mouse. I can type in M4, close my parentheses, hit enter. All right, so now we've moved from our no spaces to no spaces and lowercase. All right, and then the very last thing we're going to do is attach www.netflix.com to the first part. So we're going to use equals concatenate, which is our concatenate function. And this one you'll see has a sort of ... in its explanation of its argument. So it can take text number 1, text number 2, and it can actually take up to 255 different pieces of text and glue them together. All right, now I don't have to put in 255 pieces of text. I could just put in 2 or 3 or however many I want. In this case, I want to give it 2. I want to give it www.netflix.com. And I want to have a slash in there. Then I'm going to close my quotes. I'm always using quotes when I want Excel to recognize a block of text. Then I'm going to do a comma, and you'll see my little hint helper thing automatically jumped over to text 2. It's reminding me which argument I'm on, right? This was a helpful thing to look at. And then I'm going to grab the result of my last formula. So I'm going to grab N4, go over on my keyboard, close my parentheses, hit enter. And now I've created this URL, netflix.com/red-notice. All right, so this took 3 different formulas. We did these in 3 different steps. You can also nest all of these all together, which is what I did here. All right, so in this case, I'm just doing equals concatenate this chunk of text. And for my second argument, I'm just giving it yet another set of functions. So when it gets here, it's going to say, all right, let me take the lowercase of whatever this thing is. And when it gets to this thing, it's going to say, all right, let me just substitute whatever's in K4 to take out the spaces. So it's doing these 3 steps that we just stepped through in columns M, N, and O, but it's doing them all in one column instead. Both work equivalently well. As you get more comfortable with formulas, it's typically faster to write them this way. As you're learning, it can be easier to kind of start with this and make sure you're getting all the steps right before you combine them. So totally up to you. All right, just a little refresher. Any questions about what we did with these formulas? Okay, all right. And then as a last reminder, anytime you have a formula, you can drag or copy it down and it'll move down with you. So for example, move this on down and it's going to copy my formula on down the column beside these values. All right. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit before we get into the rest of our session about getting help from AI with Excel. So I gave an AI assistant, I like Claude, but you can use whatever. I gave it this same prompt that we just worked through, right? Create a URL for each show, you know, using the netflix.com, lowercase, no spaces, etc. All right, and here's what it came up with. It came up with, I think, just about exactly what we came up with. And it's given me a little explainer, right? It's given me that I need to concatenate, I need to lower, I need to substitute. And then it's given me some examples of my output. Now, there's like stuff about how to write a good prompt for this, right? I gave it an example. There's stuff like that you want to do to get anything useful out of an AI assistant. But if you are using this, you know, in this class or in just your general usage of Excel, that is totally fine. I would encourage you to make sure if you don't get sort of an explanation spit out, that you ask for an explanation so that you can kind of read through and make sure that it logically makes sense to you. Also, once you've written kind of a handful of formulas yourself, you'll start to recognize, for example, concatenate or substitute especially are very common formulas. So you'll start to recognize those and just kind of start to recognize whether the results that you get make sense. All right, so my general tips for this are make sure you understand the formula that it wrote, right? If you're going to ask it to write a formula or kind of do that for you, make sure you understand what it's doing. Can you sort of explain back what it's spitting out to you? Some of these tools have a tendency to sort of create an overly complex thing that like is not sort of the same way a human would write it. So if you get something back that seems really complicated, just make sure it makes sense. Do kind of like a logic check on anything you get back. And then same thing with the output, like give it a try, copy paste it into your sheet, do it on a couple rows, make sure it makes sense. If it's a nested formula, like what we just talked about here, you can kind of copy paste out each part, right? I could just copy paste out the substitute part of this, put it in its own cell with an equal sign and make sure that that piece makes sense, right? And then in general, you should just remember that these things can make mistakes. There are different versions of Excel. There are not that many, but there are some formulas that only work in Google Sheets or don't exist in Google Sheets or only exist in an old version of Excel. So it's definitely possible that you get back a result that isn't quite going to work. So definitely assume it's wrong and make sure it's right before you keep using it. I find these tools really helpful as sort of generating a first draft for things like writing formulas or code. So just would encourage you to think of it that way. All right. Okay, so this is sort of the problem or the data set that we're going to be working with for the purposes of today's session. Last week we worked with some Netflix data. This week we are going to be working with some fictionalized data about a network of podcasts. Okay, so none of these are real podcasts, this is fictional data. But in our fictional situation, you are working on marketing for a large network of 500 podcasts. Maybe that's your summer internship. All right. And you've got a few kind of tasks that you need to take care of. All of these different shows are uploading audio for their new episodes. You might want to check something like, I have a list of all the audio files that have been uploaded. I have a list of the 500 podcasts. I want to see who hasn't uploaded their audio yet, who's missed their deadline, who hasn't uploaded their episode this week. That's something we'll figure out using XLOOKUP. And then we also need a list of all those episodes with their show title and what the audio file is. All right, so that's what we're going to be working through today. That's kind of our scenario. I picked this scenario because the company that I work at does podcast advertising technology. So this is the area I know a little bit about. All right. Okay, so the tool we're going to use for most of this is XLOOKUP. What is XLOOKUP? Given a value to search for that value in another range and return any value associated with that searched value. All right, so I think this might be easier to show you as a little demo. Get out of this guy. Okay. So let's look at this. All right, so just as a little bit of a demonstration. Let's say you own a coffee shop. You're working at a coffee shop. Here's your list of prices of the items that you're selling. And here's the 5 orders that have come in so far today. You want to know how much money your coffee shop has earned so far today. And these are the 2 pieces of information that you have. So what would you, this is a small data set. You could probably do this with, on the back of a napkin if you needed to, right? You'd say, all right, cappuccino, that was $5. Another cappuccino, that's another $5. All right, that's $10. Okay, matcha latte is $6.50, so we're at $16.50. All right, drip coffee, that's $3. So now we're at $19.50, right? So for each thing here, you kind of run over, check the price, and add them all up, right? That's kind of the type of thing that you would need to do to figure out how much money your coffee shop has earned so far today. This is a really common situation when you're working with data. You might have one sheet that has everybody's emails and their major, and you might have another sheet that has everybody's emails and whether they RSVP'd for your event. And you want to check how many people from each major RSVP'd to your event, right? These are the types of issues that you can solve using XLOOKUP, all right? So how do we take a look at this? The formula that we write looks like this up here in my formula bar. All right, so I've got equals XLOOKUP, and then I've got 4 arguments afterwards. And you'll see now that I've already typed it, Excel is doing some handy kind of highlighting for me to just visually check that I'm referring to the data I need to, okay? So the first argument that this function takes is my lookup value, okay? The thing to search for. In this case, the thing I want to search for in my price list is cappuccino, right? On this first item, I want to look for cappuccino in my price list, grab the price, and stick it back over there. All right, so that's the first argument I give it is just the cell in my order list for cappuccino, which is an X4, okay? Next thing I want to give it is where should I go look? Where is this list of prices? Where should I go look for the word cappuccino where it has the price? That's my lookup array. And in that case, that's these 3 items here, or this kind of column R piece of information. Okay, go look for cappuccino in column R, and then go grab the result that goes with cappuccino from the return array, which in this case is just the next column, column S. All right, so this is saying, look at what's in X4, go find if there's a match in column R. If there is, grab the thing in the same row, and then spit it back into the cell that I'm typing my formula into, all right? Now this very last argument is in brackets right here, which means it's optional, but it's very handy. This is, what do you do if it's not found? What do you do if cappuccino is not on the menu? What should I return? The default in Excel is to return kind of like a weird error message. So I like to give it a little text that sort of makes sense to whoever's reading this. So in this case, not found or not found on the menu. Be sort of a more helpful piece of text. All right, close my parentheses, hit enter, and it gives me my 5. I'll do a quick visual check. That makes sense. Should be $5. If you remember from our data formatting, I can come here to my number format menu and change this to a $sign, just to make sure that that makes sense. And then I can copy paste this formula on down. Now there's one minor issue with this formula, which will become clear in a second. So we have this almost correct. I'm going to paste this all down. Let's see what we get. So first cappuccino's $5. Makes sense. Next cappuccino, also $5. Makes sense. Matcha latte, not found. Okay, so based on my formula, that means it went and looked for matcha latte, couldn't find it. And so this is my sort of if not found text, right? That's the text I put in for that argument. But we can see with our eyeballs that matcha latte is in fact on the menu. So what is going on? You'll notice that when you copy paste a formula down, the sort of cells that that formula refers to copy paste down with it in sort of a logical way. So in this case, we're telling it to look at cell X4 and then go grab the associated price. When I copy pasted it down, it said, all right, go look at cell X5 and then go find the associated price, etc. Right? It's going to copy that down. That's very useful. That's what I want it to do. Now, here's the only problem. We notice in our second cell here, our second 2 arguments, which are our lookup array and our return array, right? These 2 pieces of information. For this cell, it's looking from R5 to R7 for the price and then, or for the name of the drink. And then it's looking from S5 to S7 for the price. All right, so basically that whole thing moved down a block too. Now, I didn't really want it to move down a block, right? Because now I'm missing part of my menu. And in fact, when I get to this one, it's looking in these cells for the price of a matcha latte, which is not there, so it's saying not found. So in general, it's really great and helpful that Excel is going to do this. It's called relative cell reference. It's really helpful that it knows if I copy paste down, I want you to move one kind of row down with me. But there are situations like this where we want it to look at a fixed price list where we do not want it to do that. So there are 2 ways we can explicitly tell it when we don't want it to do that. This is called an absolute cell reference. So what I can do is insert into my little range here. So when I originally told it R4 to R6, I can add some $signs in front of my row numbers here. I'm just going to use my keyboard and an arrow key, run over and just insert some $signs in front of those numbers. Those $signs are essentially going to lock that range into place. So it's going to have my X4 when I copy it down will continue to be X5, X6, etc. Anything with the $sign is going to stay locked. That's me telling Excel you should stay there. All right, now that didn't change the result for my first row. Won't change the result for my second row, but as I copy this down, it changes the results for all my other rows. Because if we look, for example, in row 6, it's looking for the value in X6 matcha latte, but it's still looking in rows 4 to 6 for what the price should be. All right, so I've sort of locked it in. That's called an absolute cell reference. Okay. All right. And now my not found is working as intended, right? Because somebody ordered a vanilla latte. That's not on my price list yet. Okay. Last thing I'll show you, the reason that I like to put in this not found text, I'm going to take this out, just do the required 3 arguments. If you don't put that sort of optional 4th argument for some text, this is sort of the default Excel error message. This is a little confusing. It like looks weird. It has this weird green dot thing. And especially for people who are a little bit less familiar with Excel, like if you're going to make the spreadsheet and email it to your boss, for example, this looks like something is wrong, And it might not be the case that anything's wrong. It might just be, you know, not found, or this is a new menu item or whatever. So because of that, I like to put a little bit of text for most use cases so that it's just more clear what's going on. All right. Okay. All right, the very last thing I'll say is that XLOOKUP will return the first value that it finds in the list. So if we had cappuccino listed on our menu multiple times, so kind of a printing error in our menu, we had multiple rows, and the other cappuccino was $6, it's going to stop the first time it finds cappuccino. All right, so this is relevant if you have info that you want sorted by date, and maybe there might be multiple rows, but you just want the earliest date or the most recent date. All right, you're going to want to keep in mind to make sure your data is sorted when you're using that formula. Okay. I threw a lot of information at you. I'm going to give you all a chance to try writing your first XLOOKUP. So what you're going to do is add a column, or I think I've already added the column for you. Actually, there should be a little placeholder in the data set. So it should be that week 2 data set linked from our site. And you're going to add a column for upload date. So if you look in your, yes, should be just here, make sure everybody's downloaded your own copy of this so you can edit. So under upload date, I want you to write an XLOOKUP formula that finds the upload date for this show from our episodes tab. All right, now let's talk about how this data is structured a little bit. This is a pretty common setup. So we have a few different tabs or sheets within our workbook. All right, this tab has one row for each fictional podcast. All right, so you'll notice each show has a show ID. It has the name of whoever makes the podcast, their email, some other information about it. All right. And then for episodes, we have our episodes data, which has an ID for each episode, the ID of which show this episode goes with, right? We're a network, we work with all these podcasts, so we're getting all their audio, the date that it was uploaded, and then some more information about that audio file. All right. So how would we find the upload date just logically? What we would do is we would say, all right, this is show number 1. So we'd go to our episodes tab. We'd maybe scroll down in here. This is kind of a big data set. So we might sort or filter for our show ID equals 1. We would find whatever date that is, and we would go put that in our upload date here. All right. So this is another case very similar to our order list and our price list. We're trying to match information. We have a bridge, which in this case is our show ID number. All right, so we have a bridge between those two pieces of data, but we need to connect them, and that's where we're going to use XLOOKUP. All right, so what you want to look up is where does this show ID appear in our episodes table, and then grab the associated upload date. Okay. So go ahead and take a stab at that in your copy of the spreadsheet. Now, you should start with the formula, but the piece I just mentioned about sorting, it's possible that a show might have uploaded multiple episodes. Maybe it's a daily podcast, so it's got multiple episodes. So make sure you're getting that earliest date in case of multiple uploads for a show. All right, so I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to try. I'm going to float around and just give me a wave or a shout if you are stuck. Oh, you should, it should be a USC. Oh, weird. Okay, what's your other email? The not USC one? Oh, I think you're on the thing. I don't know. All right. Okay, you can access his email normally. It's a particular page, just like if I send something to that email, will you get it? Okay, so let me just share. Okay, we'll get to it. Thank you. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back. All right, I just sent you an invite to check your email. You should have like an invite to it.
This is like.
Oh, so they're just scrolled over to the side. So go to the one you had open.
Oh.
Yeah, so on the bottom here, if you just do this little arrow.
Oh.
Yeah, they're all in there. You were just a little scrolled over.
Oh,
Yeah, you're all good.
Okay, this to add thing. Is to directly. Sort of it. Sort of.
这个一个2月5号的东西 earliest 这真的是对
This isn't normally by slow. Maybe try a different browser.
感觉
I would maybe give a code. Sorry.
sort 最后就是在这儿可就是可以选 ascending 或者是
Yeah, see, this is not. Yeah. So I think it's sorry. Virus.
是这个 ID， 这个 ID 是这个 ID， 是收 ID， 是这个 ID， 是收 ID， 那就是这个对啊，那我是对的，6是。
Anybody stuck? Anybody having issues with the file? Anybody? Okay, does anyone feel like they've got an X lookup working? Need a few more minutes? You're feeling stuck, just try to think about your 4 arguments and what those 4 pieces of information should be. All right, so what's the value you want to go look for in the episode sheet? What column, where in the episode sheet do you want to go look for that value? And what column do you want the result back from? We want the date, so where are the dates hanging out? All right, once you have those 3 pieces of information, constructing the formula gets a little easier. Sorry, and if you're not getting this pop-up, you should be able to get it on the right-hand side if you do either insert formula or formulas insert function from your top toolbar, you can get the same pop-up on your right-hand side. So lookup value, our lookup array, and our return array. So if you go to this cell link, you can get the data set that we're right. It's this one here, it says digital dash lounge dash cell. If you take that into your web browser, you'll get there's a sample data set that we're all working on. Okay, so that's okay. It's on the whiteboard that'll actually. Oh, you're fine. That's okay. That's okay. Okay, so this tab that we're looking at here is our episodes tab, right? So each row in here is an episode. All right, so our columns are ID, show ID, upload date, audio file, etc. So which of those columns also exists on our show table?
On the ID. Sorry, I'm so bad at.
No, that's okay. That's okay. All right, so each of our shows has an ID. We can think of that as the ID for the show. Now, if we go to our episodes, this does have the same name, right? It has the name ID, but conceptually, each row here is an episode. And then each episode might be associated with a different show. All right, so our show ID is our piece of information that connects it to our show tab. Does that make sense? So the first thing you want to look at in writing your formula, when you're on, so your formula writer, that first piece of information, and let's do, if you go, once you go to formulas, insert function. And then, all right, great. So this is going to give you a little bit more structure for putting in your arguments. All right, so the first thing you want to tell it is what should it grab from this sheet to go look up in the other sheet. All right, so what value? Yes, yeah, that's the first thing you need to give it. That's your lookup value. So that's just going to be one cell of information. What on this, in this first row, what do you want to use to go find the corresponding episode? This one? Exactly, but just that, so this, it's just that cell, it's not the whole column. right? It's just your individual cell.
For the same row that you're in. So you should be typing your formula in row 2. All right,
And so you want to grab that cell in that same row.
so go look at where you're typing your formula in. You're gonna scroll over, right? So you're typing it here, it's in row 2. Right, so you would want to go grab the value that's in row 2, not in row 1.
Oh, it's like. So this should be like, look up, right here is like an H.
Exactly.
Yep, because what's in A2?
The ID associated with the show in the same row. So that's a piece of information that's going to help you tie us to that next.
Oh, okay, so it's one, row by one.
Exactly. Yep. Very good.
Which is 496. And then
Okay.
Anybody feel like they have an XLOOKUP working? Back here?
maybe.
All right, why don't you tell us what you got and we'll figure it out together. Okay.
So I'm using Google Sheets
Okay.
and
Should be pretty similar.
I started by organizing the episodes
Okay.
in order.
All
on that
right.
page. So the show ID, I mean.
In order of show ID.
Yes.
Okay. Largest, first Weber's a little slow. All right, great. And then after you sorted the show ID, what did you do after that?
And then going back to the first page, I did X lookup.
Okay, so we're in our upload date column, right? So I'm gonna do equals
Equals X lookup.
X lookup. Very good, name of our formula.
And then starting with what it is that I want to connect from this page to the next page, which is the ID.
Great.
So starting with column A,
Okay, great.
it's A2 to A456.
Okay.
And putting a $sign before the numbers.
Okay.
A2. Or before 2 and before 456.
Okay.
And then next,
All right.
taking it to the next tab, the episodes tab.
Okay.
I want to connect it to the show ID there. So it's $2 exactly. To $456.
Okay.
Still in the episodes tab now. What is the thing that I'm looking for, which is the upload date? So column episodes, exclamation point C to $2 to 456. And then finally not found for, it's not there.
All right. Okay. This is a fun error message. We got spill. Is that what you got?
No.
Okay. All right. So that's because this is close to correct, but we got a couple issues. So we got a starting point. Okay. So first things first, when we look at our arguments, our very first argument is a value. It's an individual value that we want to go look for in a bunch of other information. So if we go back to our cappuccino thing, for example, my first argument here is not X4 to X11, right? It's just X4 because for this row, the only thing I'm looking at is X4. All I'm doing is looking at cappuccino and then I'm looking it up over in this table. All right, so my first argument is one individual cell, not an array, not a column. All right, so going back to the formula that you gave us, our very first piece of information here is we had selected the whole kind of A column. All right, and it looks like it tried to correct it, but we want this first piece should be a cell. It should just be a letter and a number, an individual cell. So in this case, that'll be A2. So you're looking in the right column, you just didn't need to select all of them. That first argument is just one value. All right, second argument here. Okay, look up array. Where do we want to go look for this value? So that is over in our episodes tab, looking in column B. I'll hop over there. Great, this is great. So this is looking for the ID that was in A2, right? It's going to go look for whatever was in A2 in our previous sheet, which in this case was the ID 1. And it's going to come over and look for that ID in our show ID column. Now, why are we looking in column B instead of column A, right? Why are we looking at show ID instead of ID? This is a very common setup for kind of data files. So each individual sort of table or sheet, or they might be separate files, will be sort of an individual object or concept, as you could think of it, right? So in this tab, each row is an individual show. In this tab, each row is an individual episode. So there could be multiple episodes per show. In fact, there probably are, right? So typically each table will have its own ID, which is often just called ID or UID or whatever. So if you ever have something that's just called ID, you should be looking at what sort of object, what's the file name, what are these objects? Because when we come here, if we're just looking at the column names, we might see ID and want to match them together. We just need to stop and think about our ID column on our show means the ID of that show. And the ID column on our episodes tab is an ID of that episode. It's a different thing, even though they're clearly just also numerical ID numbers. Okay. So that's why we're looking at column B for our second argument, which is right here. All right, so fix this. All right, so we've adjusted this to A2. We've said we're going to go look in our episodes table in column B. We're going to look at rows 2 to 456. We've done our absolute cell reference, so we've locked those in place, so that piece isn't going to move down with us. Great, and then we're going to look for the date in the associated row that's in column C, okay? And then we've got our last optional argument as not found. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that got rid of our error message. So all we did is we just changed this first one from being a range of cells to an individual cell. All right. And then we can copy paste that all the way down. Yeah.
On Google Sheet, the one that I had that came up as an error for you still worked for me.
Got
And I
it.
did it with just one cell and they both are the same. Like if I did a range, it still worked with range.
Interesting. That might be a Google Sheets thing. Google might be just kind of like correcting, but this is a common error. So Google might be just correcting for it. I'm not sure. But typically that first argument should always just be one.
Yeah, it still shows the range.
Yeah, question?
Why do we need the dollar signs?
So the dollar sign is sort of locking into place the rows that we're looking at for our reference. So in this example, before we had the dollar signs in this one, let's say we get rid of them here. Get rid of them from this formula and I'll copy paste this down. Now watch what changes when I copy paste it down. It's suddenly not gonna be able to find a bunch of stuff because that range moved. Like for this vanilla latte, for example, it's looking in these cells for a price because it moved down that same number of rows. So that dollar sign is that thing that's locking it in place. Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
So you mentioned that Excel is gonna take the first value associated with, so
Yes.
I didn't organize the ID, I organized the upload date.
Yes.
So
Great. You're
also-
half a step ahead of me. Yes. So the last thing we want to correct from this. So we organize them by show, which is totally fine. That actually probably doesn't impact our results because we would have found show 1 regardless. What we actually want to sort by is date so that for every show, their earliest upload date is first. So we could sort by show ID and then upload date. That would work. In this case, it actually works to also just sort by upload date. So if I just change this to sort newest to oldest, it's going to think for a second. And that'll put that date first. So yeah, to your point for the sorting, we definitely can sort it by show ID. It doesn't hurt. But the thing we really want to search for or sort by in this case is by date. I think we said we wanted the earliest date first. Yeah, earliest date first, so in that case, I would sort oldest to newest, and then as it's coming down, it'll find that date first. Anything, sort of earlier will come first in that column. Excellent. All right. Okay. Any questions about how we got our upload date? Or did anyone end up with a different formula that seems to work?
Another question. How do we do two filters again, or two sorting? I want to sort episodes first and then dates first. When I
Yeah, so in this
sorted-
case, you actually only need one sort, so you can just sort by upload date. Because it's gonna go look for the show itself, right? So it doesn't care, like, it's gonna say, all right, I'm gonna go down this row and find the first thing for show number 1. And it's just gonna go down. So if these are already in date order, the first one it finds will be the earliest. If you do wanna do more advanced sorting, you have a sort and filter menu in your toolbar. And you can grab, might be that icon or something similar. It should be like a funnel icon. And if you do custom sort, you can do multiple layers of sorting. I could do date and then show and then, audio length, et cetera. You can add multiple layers of sorting. You don't need to do that here. We just need to sort by date to make sure we're getting that first one.
And what's the, if mine is showing up as just a number, I know that there's a way
Yes.
to change that, but I don't remember how.
Very good. Okay, this is our favorite magic tool in Excel, which is our number format menu in our toolbar. So if you have a date and it's not formatted as a date, it's just formatted as general, it's going to show up as a weird number like this. So I'm going to just change my number. I'm going to select either that column or that cell, and then I'm just going to change it to, I'm going to do short date, and it'll change right back to my expected date.
Perfect.
Very good question.
Can I do it? Can I do it again? I
Yeah.
didn't find how to change that number.
Oh, how to change it? Yeah, yeah. So in your home ribbon at the top, you should have a little drop down called number format. It might say general or number or something like that. If you've selected your cell already, you can change it. Like I could change it to dollars if I wanted. That doesn't really make sense. It's not $45,000. But if I change it back to my date, I see that it's just February 5th.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep, so it's not losing the information, it's just changing the format.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Some are still not found. Is that normal?
Yeah.
Okay, great question. So let's see, this one is not found. So this is show number 4. So if you have that question, first thing I would do is go to my episodes tab and just visually look for one that is show number 4. So in this case, I might do this is already set to be filter dropdowns. So I might just unselect these and go look for 4. And actually it looks like show 4 is missing. So it's missing, so that actually is correct. That's what we want.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so this is one of the more complex formulas in Excel. That's why most of our session today is dedicated to it, but it is extremely useful. So we're gonna get a little bit more practice with this one because it's good to get comfortable with the idea of how it works, okay? So. All right, I think I'm actually gonna cut back to this. Okay, we got time, okay. So just a quick review of this from the beginning and from last week. If you have multiple formulas that you want to nest, and this includes XLOOKUP, you can essentially copy paste anything that comes after the equal sign of that formula and plop it in to any argument of another function. All right, so this is what I was doing earlier when we were doing the Netflix URL. All right, you can take the length of whatever this text is, or you can just take this whole formula here, plug it in as your argument to your length function, and this line will accomplish the same thing as this line. All right, so if you want to copy paste your formulas, you can nest them. This is how you do it, especially with something like XLOOKUP. Helpful to write your XLOOKUP first and make sure it works, and then try to substitute anything in afterwards. That makes sense. Okay, so we're gonna go right into another exercise because I want you to get some more kind of practice rounds with XLOOKUP. Helpful to kind of get in your brain how it works. All right, so we're gonna add 2 columns to our campaign participation table. So let's go look at what that looks like in our data set. Campaign participation. Okay, what is this tab? This has a column for campaign ID, the name of the ad campaign, the show ID, and the CPM. Okay, CPM is a dollar amount related to the cost of an ad. It's the cost per 1,000 impressions of the ad. All right, so in this case, this one is $38.26 for 1,000 impressions of this ad. So 1,000 times here's this ad, right? So this is a perfect example of a very common case where you want to use VLOOKUP. We have this data set that shows, okay, for this DoorDash campaign, shows number 1, 11, 16, 27, 30, et cetera, are participating. We scroll down, we'll see other campaigns. There's a Hilton Hotels, Macy's, et cetera, right? There's a bunch of different shows participating in all these different campaigns. It's more useful to me if I want to, you know, if I'm working with DoorDash and they're saying which shows are, you know, running my ad right now, I want to be able to tell them the show titles, not the show IDs, because the show IDs aren't meaningful to them. All right, so this is another common use case for XLOOKUP. I want to use XLOOKUP to grab the show title from my shows tab. All right, so I want to go look up here. So my formula, I should be writing in column E of my campaign participation tab is what is the title that goes with this show ID. You need to open your little formula helper, remind you what your arguments are. All right. I'm going to put the show title on our campaign participation sheet using XLOOKUP. Yeah. This is the formatting thing. So you go back to your home ribbon and do the number
然后你要找这个，
and change it from general to state.
实际情况是什么呢？实际情况下，
Yep, here we go. Okay. Yep, just a formatting issue.
Okay.
Yep. Remember, your first argument should be your value, your individual show ID that you want to go look up. Your second argument should be all the show IDs you want to look in. The third argument should be all the show titles associated with those IDs. Anyone got an XLOOKUP working for the title? I think you got it. All right. Dave, hop over here. Hear this? All right, what you got?
So, I first tap in like X lookup
All right, equals XLOOKUP.
and,
I can spell. Okay, equals XLOOKUP. Great.
and then I choose, C2 from the campaign.
C2, very good. So that's the first cell in my show ID column. Very good.
Yeah, and, comma, and then I choose, in the shows sheet, I choose,
Yep.
from A1
Right.
to A. Oh, yeah, I think I forgot to add the,
Dollar signs. Okay, that's okay. What do you have? A1 to
to A500.
A500. All right, great. Drop those dollar signs in. All right,
And then I add the show from the shows sheet from I think it's E1 to E500.
all right, because E is our title column. All right, so E, and then same deal. I'm gonna do my dollar sign 1, dollar sign 500. All right.
And yeah, and the very last I add like not found.
Oh, fantastic. Great. Okay. Fantastic. All right, so we've got our first cell is C2. That means it's gonna go grab the show ID that is sitting in cell 2, if I can scroll the correct direction, which is show ID number 1. It's gonna go look in column A in the shows table to see if it can find a show with ID number 1 in column A. If it does find that ID in column A, it'll hop over to that same row in column E and grab the associated title, which in this case is the fictional podcast Adrenaline Hobbies. Very good. Awesome. Now this is a use case where we are not expecting a not found because we typically wouldn't have a show like participating in a campaign if we don't know what the show is, right? That wouldn't really just logically make sense for sort of this business context that we're talking about. So this is a case where if I saw a not found, I might think, something's wrong. I should maybe go look. So if I were going to do some data quality check, I might want to kind of scroll through or filter and see if any of these came out to be not found. And if so, it might be an issue with, I might be missing a show from my show data set. But I don't see any show not founds, so that makes sense. Cool, very good. All right, fantastic. Okay. Any questions about what we just did with getting the show title? Questions about how that works?
Like, what if instead of typing in the exact roles, I select the entire column of the show?
Yes, great question. Okay, so this is a good sort of cheat code for the problem that we were talking about with our sort of menu moving down without us or without us wanting it to, right? So we fixed that here by putting in our dollar signs, which is our absolute reference, which is sort of locking it in. But what happens if we just do that whole column? Right, so we can give it the whole column without specifying any rows, which we can just do by either selecting it with our mouse or it comes up as R to R, S to S. Right, let's give that a try. Copy that down. Fantastic. Yeah, so the answer is that also works. That works great. The only time I wouldn't do this, and you would want to use the absolute cell reference, your dollar signs, is if you've got a data set that's got like subtotals or like other stuff at the bottom, it's going to get weird because then it's going to find a subtotal in this table and match it to the subtotal in your other table, and that's not going to make logical sense. So you can absolutely do columns, especially if you're just doing something quick and you've got a nice clean sheet. It's just selecting the whole column works perfectly fine. If you have anything where you're doing subtotals or anything like that, I would, or like you got a, not very organized, you got a few other pieces of data going on, that's when I would do your absolute cell reference. Yeah,
Thank you.
great question.
So why don't we have to reorganize the order of the show ID?
Oh, great question. We don't have to organize them here because this is the sheet that we're looking from. So in every single row, this formula is going to just say, start fresh, like what's this show ID? Let me go grab its ID from the other table. So, and we know, or like just sort of conceptually, that our shows is like table is only gonna have one row for each show, right? It wouldn't have like two different rows for show number one. And it's not gonna have multiple copies. So it's just gonna go look there every time. The reason we sorted the data before is because in this table, we were going to look up in, right, for an individual show might have many episodes. And so we didn't know how this was sorted before. This wasn't sorted by date, so we might have gotten an older episode, a newer episode. There wasn't sort of like a logic to it. So in that case, you want to know the logic. You want to know it's either by date or in ID order or, longest to shortest, whatever kind of makes sense for your context. Yeah, good.
Let's say if they're in the sheet, there will be there is a subtotal, like I want to jump, like I want to only check, for example, I want to like select all the column, like the other ID except, for example, number
Mhm.
1 and
Yeah.
number 10 and every 100 or something.
Yeah.
So how should I do that? Should I put it like, for example, A2 to A9 and
Yeah.
plus A11 to
Oh, that's a good question. Like if you wanted to skip a row, but then still get the rest of the range below it. I would probably say like if you feel like you're needing to do that, I would reorganize your data so that you can select it as a continuous range. There might be a way to do what you're talking about, but it's not super common and it's harder to like troubleshoot or copy paste from there. So if you feel like you want to do that, I would reorganize your data so that you can select it all as one.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Yeah.
So if you don't want to select it.
Yep.
From the second one from the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah, like how the shortcut is that just like scrolling it down and
Yeah, I usually do. Let me see if it works on the web browser. Yeah, so an easy way to do that is just sort of like do the keyword shortcut and then you'll still get your absolute cell reference, but you won't have to like scroll all the way. For a Mac, it's Shift. So if I'm in the top cell I want, and I want to go just all the way down to the bottom, I would do Shift Command and then my down key. All right, and that's going to automatically select all the way to the last cell that's filled in. And then if you want to omit that last one, you just hold down Shift again and go up one. And that'll leave off your last, like if this were a subtotal or something that you wanted to leave out. Yeah. All right, so it was Shift Command down and then just one more Shift up to leave off that last one. All right. Great. Okay. We're gonna do another one of these. So these are gonna be a little bit similar, but they should start to feel a little bit more comfy as we go. All right. So we're gonna add another column to that same sheet. We just added campaign, where we just added the show title, right? Next thing we want to do is this personal endorsement column. All right, so this is the last bit of our data set that we haven't looked at yet. It's our personal endorsement table. This has one row for each campaign. And then it has a true false for whether personal endorsement is required. Personal endorsement is when a podcast host says, this natural deodorant is great. I use it myself. Here's my promo code to buy it. If they're required to say that part in the ad, I use it myself. Its personal endorsement is required, it's true. If they just have to talk about the brand, but they don't have to say that they use it themselves, it's false. All right, so it's a common thing for advertising, whether you have to personally endorse it or not, because an advertiser might be willing to pay more if you personally endorse it. Okay, so we have for each campaign whether personal endorsement is true or false, but same deal. On this tab, we have the campaign, but we don't have the piece of information about whether personal endorsement is required. So if you are a podcaster and you are getting invited to participate in a DoorDash advertising campaign, you want to know whether personal endorsement is required. So I want to have a column here that says true, false for each of these campaigns. Is personal endorsement required? So it's very similar to what we just did, where we filled in the show title just because that information was stored over here. Now we want to do our personal endorsement column where that information is stored in our personal endorsement sheet. All right, so very similar XLOOKUP. You want to think about which piece of information bridges your campaign participation sheet to your personal endorsement sheet, right? So what column connects those two? What piece of information is the bridge? That's what you're going to want to use as your lookup value and then as your lookup array. And then what piece of information do you want to return back in the return array? Right. So another X lookup. Right, if you're feeling comfortable with XLOOKUP, if you feel like you've got a few under your belt, you can try nesting it with an if formula to sort of change the true false to some cleaner text, something like personal endorsement is required if it's true, right? Only do that if you're feeling comfortable with XLOOKUP, but if you are, you can play with that. So you could do if and then replace the value of your XLOOKUP that returns true false with some text like personal endorsement is required. Little bonus extra stretch if you want it. Yeah. You got it? You have a question? Nice. Oh, gotcha. So that's just sort of, that's this bonus of you can do sort of like an if. So this is giving you a true false. So you could do like an if that's true, then text person.
Oh,
person is required.
gotcha.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
See, this is like cost.
Is it cost per 1,000? So it's cost per 1,000 impressions, CPM, cost per mil, so it's M. So the way the conversion formula for this is CPM times downloads divided by 1,000. So it gives you revenue. Yeah.
Accumulated revenue.
Yes, so that's what we're going to cover in a few minutes. But the short version is you do sort of absolute cell reference at the top and then not for the bottom. So that if the top sort of stays blue and then it's taking the sum of the range that goes down.
Okay.
But I'm going to explain that whole thing in a few minutes.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. There'll be a recording so posted on the paper. Yeah. All right, how's this XLOOKUP feeling? All right, anyone feel like they got something working for this one? Yeah, right here? All right, let's see. Get out of here, let me delete this. All right, what you got?
X
Equals XLOOKUP.
B2.
B2, all right, B2, that's the title of our campaign, all right. Comma,
Personal endorsement.
okay,
A2 to A7.
fantastic.
Lock the
Dollar signs, love it.
This one is personal endorsement, B2 to B7.
All right, B2 to B7. Here we go, B perfect.
Also lock
Fantastic, B2, B7.
Yeah, I didn't put a.
Perfect. All right, great. Okay. And there we go. We got a false. So DoorDash week of 4/1. If I go look in our personal endorsement table, DoorDash week of 4/1, I can see that that's false. So that totally makes sense. Cool. That looks great. All right. And why did you pick B2 as your first argument?
Because that's like the bridge between the two tables.
Exactly. All right. So looking at all the possible columns in this table, the only column in this table that also exists in this other tab is the name of the campaign. That's the only column that overlaps. And it looks like, luckily for me, they're spelled exactly the same. So they're working as that bridge. Typically for that value that you're using to look up, you want to use like an ID number or an email, something that you know is going to be unique. In this case, this happens to work. If you're like exporting data from the system or something where you like know the spelling will be consistent, this works totally fine. Awesome. Thank you. Very good. All right. Okay, I just want to make a quick note. If you've used Excel for a while or you're working with someone who's used Excel for a while, there's a sort of older generation of XLOOKUP called VLOOKUP, which you might still like see around or hear people mention. They do the same thing. So if someone is asking you to use VLOOKUP, you can use XLOOKUP unless you have like an old version of Excel on your computer and it like doesn't have XLOOKUP yet. Okay, so all you need to know is VLOOKUP is similar, has a few limitations. It's like a little clunkier to use because the columns have to be in a specific order, whereas for us, they could be in any order with XLOOKUP. So all you need to know is this is an example of one of the XLOOKUPs that we just wrote. This is how you write that same thing in VLOOKUP. So you have to use a whole separate formula to accommodate that like error case. It's just a little clunkier. So if any of you hear or see anyone talking about VLOOKUP, it is functionally the same, and I would encourage you to use XLOOKUP. All right, cool. All right, our last sort of main topic for tonight is cumulative formulas. All right, so what we want to do here is apply a formula to all of the rows preceding the row that we're in. What does that mean? We go back to our coffee shop example, right? We talked about how to use XLOOKUP to go grab the price for each of our orders, right? But if you're sitting there working the barista counter that day, it might be sort of like encouraging for you to know how much revenue has rolled in as you get each drink, right? We sold 2 drinks for $6.50. So cumulatively, we've earned $13 so far. After we sell the next drink, we've earned $19 so far, right? So sort of like the running cumulative is like the running count, right? So the way that we accomplish that with Excel is that we're going to use sort of a version of that absolute cell reference we were talking about. Now, when we used it before, we were trying to lock in both ends of our range. So we had a $sign in front of both numbers, right? We said start at F2 and end at F15 every single time. What this formula is doing is it's only having one $sign. So it's saying always start from F2. But as I copy paste this formula down, keep on adding anything below, right? So let me show you an example of what that means. Go back to our coffee demo data. All right, so the first coffee that we sell is just $5, right? That's what we got, that's where we're at. What we can do now is start our cumulative total. So we can do our sum. This is one of the kind of math formulas that we talked about last week, right? Equals sum. And this is where I'm going to give it a range. So if I wanted to start my cumulative formula, I might do something like this, right? I'm in my second row of orders. So I would say add up those first 2 orders. All right, great. So I've sold 2 cappuccinos. I made $10 so far. Fantastic. Then I might say, all right, well, I've got my cumulative formula. I want to copy this on down. Now you'll see that then after my 4th order, I've suddenly cumulatively made less dollars, which doesn't make sense. So let's go look at what's happening. So what's happening is it's only adding up Y6 and Y7, which are these 2. So it's only grabbing my last 2 drinks because it's doing that relative reference, right, where the whole thing is coming down with me. Now, if in this formula, I say, all right, always start at Y4. So I'm going to do my $sign, but I'm not going to put another $sign, meaning as I paste down, that other reference is going to move with me. Okay, so watch, so I changed this formula and I'm gonna paste it down. So watch how this changes. All right, fantastic. So now if I look at this guy, now I've made 1950 so far today, which makes sense. This is gonna take the sum always starting from Y4, even though I've come down a bunch of cells, and it's gonna come down to Y7 and it's gonna keep on going down from there. All right, so this is just a different application of that absolute cell reference that we already used, and it's happening inside of our sum function. Okay. Any questions about what this is doing? All right. Okay. So we are going to do an exercise sort of combining this with the XLOOKUP piece that we just looked at. So we want to apply sort of a cumulative revenue column formula to our campaign participation sheet. So let me explain a little bit about what that means. So in our sheet, you should now have your show title, your personal endorsement. What we want to do now is figure out, okay, as we add each show to this campaign, how much cumulative revenue are we looking at? All right, now we need to figure out how to get to revenue, and all we have here is the CPM. CPM is the industry term for the cost per 1,000 impressions. So this is this $38 for 1,000 sort of impressions of this ad. The way to get from CPM to revenue is you multiply the CPM by the number of downloads that this podcast get, divided by 1,000. Okay, because this is the cost per 1,000. So I'm going to take the downloads, divide them by 1,000, multiply them by this essentially unit price. And that's going to give me my total revenue. All right. So so once I have the revenue for each show, I can calculate my cumulative revenue, right? But we need to do a couple of prep steps to get there. The first thing we need to know is for each show, how many downloads do they get per month? That info is stored on our shows table, and we can get it with our handy tool. Say it with me, XLOOKUP. Very good. Okay. All right. So we'll grab our downloads number. We'll add a formula to get our revenue for each row, right? So this is sort of just a simple math formula, and I'm going to give it to you. Our revenue is just the CPM times the downloads number. We'll grab with XLOOKUP divided by 1,000. Okay, so that'll give us our revenue. Once we have those two things, then we're going to add a column that's doing cumulative revenue, just like we just did for our coffee shop. So we're going to add a column like this to that campaign participation tab. So adding up the dollars as we go. All right. So your campaign participation tab, you should be looking at these three columns right here. This is what you're working on. So you want to do an XLOOKUP to grab your downloads. You want to do that math formula for the revenue, right? So CPM times downloads divided by 1,000. And then you want to do a cumulative sum, just like we just did for the coffee shop, going all the way down so we can see how much revenue is adding up from all of these ad campaigns. All right. Okay, I'm going to give you all a few minutes to do that, kind of put everything together. If you're stuck, if you're lost, if you are a little stuck on the last few XLOOKUPs, give me a wave. I'll come help you out. Let's see how much money we made from all these ads. All right. are we at? Who's got the X lookup part working? X lookup to grab our downloads number from our shows tab. Let's run through the X lookup part together, because if you don't have that part, you're gonna have trouble with the rest of it. All right, so writing my X lookup for downloads, I'm gonna do equals X lookup. What's my first argument? My lookup value I want to use as my bridge to my shows tab. ID, seeing a few people mousing ID, okay, great. My ID that's sitting here in C2, so I've got X lookup, C2, comma. What's my next argument? Where am I going? Shows, fantastic. Where in my shows tab? My ID column. Right, in this case, I'm just gonna select this whole column. All right, what's my third argument? What's that piece of information I want back? Downloads, very good. My downloads are in, there's no pop-ups in the way. My downloads are monthly downloads. They're my column F. All right, so that's my third argument. All right, and I'm gonna do, if they can't find the downloads, I'm gonna say 0. All right, in this case, the number, that seems like a nice clean thing to have if I don't find it. All right. So I've got C2, that was my show ID from my campaign participation tab. I've got my column A in my shows table. That's where I'm going to go look for that ID. And if I find that ID, I'm going to go over to column F in that same row and grab my downloads number. Okay. All right, fantastic. So that'll get me my downloads number. Once you have your downloads number, then you've just got 2 formulas left to do. No more X lookup. All right, then you've just got revenue, which is this relatively simple formula. All right, equals wherever your CPM is sitting times wherever your downloads are sitting divided by 1,000. Right, so that's how we convert from CPM to revenue. All right, so for this first podcast, you should be seeing something like $5,307.39. All right, seeing some head nods, looking good. All right, who has got a cumulative revenue formula? Do we need another minute to work on our cumulative? Anybody got one working? Thanks, head nods back here. Yeah, what you got for a cumulative formula?
Full sum.
All right. Sum, parentheses. My $2, my $, fantastic. Right. Fantastic, all right, great. Okay, I think I started one row down from you. Yep, okay, scan, right, row, sum, $2 to I2, fantastic. All right, great, and then as I paste this on down, I'll see my revenue adding up. So by the time I'm at my third show, I should be seeing $15,000. So unless you sorted this differently, then you might see a different order. That's totally fine. And when I scroll all the way down to the bottom, I'm seeing these weird number signs. Does anyone know what to do with the weird? How do we get rid of the weird number signs? Yeah, we stretch out our column. Very good. So it's just hiding the number because the number got too big, which in the case of revenue is a good problem to have. All right. Keep on scrolling down past $2 million, past $3 million. Ooh, $3.5 million by the time we get all the way down here. Cool. All right, now, you'll notice some of these are popping up as 0 downloads, right? That's that value that I had put in my XLOOKUP for sort of my error condition, right? Like if you don't find it, it's 0. Obviously, in this case, a show doesn't have 0 downloads if they're getting booked on an ad campaign. So that's a data quality problem. That's something I'd want to go fix in this tab. And let's say I go fix it in one of these ones that's missing, like right here. I'm going to fill this in. Because this is all working based on formulas, this sheet will update. So that should have brought my little revenue up by a tiny bit. I'm going to check the number before, which I should have done, but that'll come update my revenue. See this from the show. 483 looks like it's missing downloads. So if I come down to show 483 over here, this guy, 483, yep. Right, yeah. ID 483 looks like it's missing downloads. I'm gonna say this guy has 200,000 downloads. And just by changing this number, I didn't change anything else. I can come back over here and I can see that this show is updated here because of that formula. It added another $2,000 and now my cumulative revenue is up another $2,000 because I fixed it in that other sheet. So that's the power of formulas. You realize if you're missing some data, this is all referring back to that same place. So if you fix it in one place, all the other places that refer to that spot will be fixed as well. We'll have to manually do it a bunch of places, which is awesome. Okay, any questions about what we just did? So we just, yeah.
I have a missing value in the middle of downloads, so I do not have any value starting a point of the same row, like in a corresponding following columns.
Okay, wait, make sure I understand what you're saying. So your downloads are showing up blank here as a result of your formula?
Yeah, I have a missing value in the middle of downloads. So starting
On this sheet or on this sheet?
on the campaign participation sheet.
Okay. So it doesn't continue down below, you're saying?
Yeah, so starting the same point at the same row, I do not have any value like in the corresponding column.
Interesting. Okay, because the text you put in there for if the download was missing was just a text word missing. So it's trying to add missing to the number and it's freaking out. For something like this, I would suggest that last value as like a 0 or like a -1, something where it would be obviously wrong, but still a number. If you replace that in your formula, I think that should. All right, so the question was in my XLOOKUP, if you have, say, in your, as this last if not found argument, let's say I had this is missing text. And then I copy my formula on down and I find some ones that are missing. Paste. Take a second. Maybe it's just R0. Easy way, I'm just gonna say, let's pretend these downloads are missing. All right, great. Doing. Oh, I think this tab is still updating. So essentially, if you are doing an XLOOKUP on a numerical column, like in this case, if you want to have it grab the downloads. Oh, I know I should have done this. There we go. Yeah, okay, so here's the same problem you were having. So I basically went and deleted this ID out of here just for the purposes of it to quickly demo. And then I changed my XLOOKUP to have this is missing as my text. Once I do that, it kind of freaks out and it's going to give me an error because the whole time it's trying to add, you know, $4,000 to this like error message, which is like not an addition it can do. So the only fix should be to do a 0 and then it should be much happier. Yeah, that fixes it and then it comes back to all numbers just by fixing it back to that 0. It works. Yeah, question.
Back in exercise, how would you do the substitute for the personal endorsement?
Oh, great. Yeah, so this is kind of a little bonus.
Nesting.
Yeah, totally. So this is using if, which we used last week, or which you could look up. There's a few ways to do this, but one way is with if. So all I'm doing here is equals if, and then I'm checking this column, column F, which is that XLOOKUP we wrote previously. And then I'm just essentially translating these like all caps true, false into like a nicer piece of text. So I'm saying if F2, meaning since this is just true, false, it can just be if. So if that thing is true, then it'll do personal endorsement is required, and then otherwise it'll do no PE required. All right, so that's what this formula is doing. So if we scroll down to a different campaign in here, yeah, like we'll see once we switch to our Hilton campaign or our Macy's campaign, now this one shows up as personal endorsement required because this column changed to true. So just kind of a simple if swapping some text usage. And if you wanted to try nesting your formulas, you could, right? So you've got your XLOOKUP right here that returns the true false. I've got this formula which says grab the thing in F2 and then do the substitution. I could just copy paste this entire thing, everything after the equal sign. I'm just going to copy, and then I can replace where I've got F2. I can paste it on in. So now I've got this big old long thing, and that's going to give me the same result. It's just doing it in one column instead of two. Now, when you're learning formulas, it's much easier to write them in separate columns and understand what they're doing. But once you're more comfortable with it, you can totally do something like this, right? Your XLOOKUP kind of, I think of it as like wrapping it in an if to add something like that. Right. Any other questions? We did XLOOKUP, cumulative. Yeah.
What was the if one more time again?
Oh, yeah, so this is just kind of, you can do whatever you want. This is not an intense part of this lesson, but as an example, you could do equals if, and the way the if formula works is go grab what's in that cell. If that's true, do this text, otherwise do this text. Yeah. Same thing we could have done lowercase, we could have done space, right? We could have done any kind of text or whatever manipulation that we wanted. All right. Okay, so we covered a lot of stuff. Just a couple last notes about lookups, whether you're using XLOOKUP or VLOOKUP. As I mentioned before, typically that bridge piece of information you're using, you really want it to be a unique identifier. If it's not something that's unique, you're going to get incorrect matches, right? If you're just matching on first name, there's always another Rachel in the class, right? So they're going to get some other Rachel's information if they're just matching on my first name. So typically you want an ID or an email, something like that. If you're not sure if something is unique, right? Like let's say you get this data set and you're like, oh man, there's like a bunch of emails in here. I don't know if these are unique or not. A quick visual way to do that, a little formatting tip, is to go in your, select your column, come to your conditional formatting ribbon up in your home ribbon, your conditional formatting option. Under highlight cell rules, there's a few different options. There's a bunch of ways to play with this, but you can go to duplicate values and it'll highlight in whatever color any duplicates appearing in this column. So that's a great way to check for, are two of these emails the same? In this case, all these emails are unique, so they're not showing up as colored in red. But let's say there was a duplicate. For example, if I copy paste this one and stick it in this column or in this row, then all of a sudden they show up as red because it found a duplicate. All right, so anytime you're going to use something as an ID, either make sure you know it's unique or do a quick, just like surf through to make sure it is. All right. And then to go back to the sorting point we talked about at the beginning. So if it's a case where you're looking up to a table that might have multiple results for the thing you're looking up, right? Multiple episodes for one show ID, make sure you have it sorted in some sort of logical order because you don't know how your data set was sorted when you got it. It might be by date or date it was created in their database, something that's not relevant to you. So in that example, we did the earliest published date because we want what was the first episode they published this week. So we did the sort by date. So if you're going to be grabbing something where it's going to be matching to multiple values, just make sure it's sorted by something that makes sense for your context. Okay. All right. This is just sort of a final note. We're not going to do this formula, but just so you know sort of the scope of formulas that you can go to from here. So we talked about a bunch of formulas last week: text, dates, numbers, math, etc. Today we talked about lookup formulas, which are one of the most powerful formulas. If you're going to put Excel on your resume or you're applying to a job that looks for Excel, specifying that you know how to use XLOOKUP is a good green flag to have on there, all right? Because that's a thing that not everybody who knows how to use basic Excel can do. If you start to go even like deeper into this formula world, you can do even more complex formulas like this one. This whole piece here is generated by a sort of collection of Excel formulas for financial information, for example. All you need to tell them is in this case, my total student loan amount, my interest rate, how many months I have to pay back, what's my payment amount. I just give it these 3 pieces of information. It gives me my payment and it'll give me this entire schedule. All right, that's all done via Excel formula. We're not going to do this formula today, but this is an example of the type of thing that you can do. You can Google or ChatGPT for, how to do a loan repayment schedule in Excel, and you can kind of map out what you're going to owe every month, when you're going to have it paid off, etc. So just another example. I think the most powerful way to use Excel is to just have an idea of the kinds of things it can do, and then go search for the specific formula you want to use once you have your idea. Okay, so just more ideas. All right, so we have 2 more sessions left in this series. Next week, we'll be covering charts and tables, including pivot tables and pivot charts. If you've heard of those or played with them a little bit, they're pretty fun. They make things nice and easy. In some case, they save you from having to do as many formulas by hand. So that's cool. So we'll talk about that next week, and then next week. And then in the last session, we'll kind of tie this all together. We'll use some formulas, we'll use some lookups, we'll use some charts and tables to put together like a full dashboard project. So you could get an idea of how you might use all these things in what kind of project scenario. All right, in the little like link from today, I've got a few more links down here at the bottom that link to a couple of like blogs and stuff that I like related to Excel and data visualization and all that stuff. And the Digital Lounge also has a little feedback form that's also linked in there. So if you have any feedback about this session and want to take a moment and fill that out, we'd appreciate it. Okay, this session is kind of intense with a lot of formulas, so scheduled it to end a couple minutes early. I'm going to hang out for a few minutes, so if you got stuck on a formula, you want to come ask me something individually, I'll hang out for a few minutes, and otherwise I hope to see you all next week.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys.